So I usually start the discussion around, what's different about AI? Why is it the zeitgeist at the moment? What is it that's captured people's imagination? And I think it's because um, we're not used to having computer algorithms learn. But what do we really mean by that? How is it different to just the automating procedures that we do at the moment? I'm sure all of us have been using traditional statistical analysis. I mean, in image analysis, for instance, we might use some sort of thresholding techniques, or if we're looking at a combination of factors that lend itself to prediction of a diagnosis, where we use things like logistic regression algorithms to maybe a more sophisticated thing, which is a little different from what we normally use to the large language models. But I think, in a nutshell, it's about learning. So rather than us build the statistical model ourselves, putting in the known factors like you would have with a randomized control trial, this time that we've managed to build computer technology that will take in information and process it super quickly, and hopefully find things in the data that we can't find ourselves in a short space of time. So let me just tell you about some of the stuff that exists already in terms of automation. Now, this is going to be a radiology biased. I'm an imaging physicist by background. I've worked in imaging for the last 30 years. So I make no apologies for that, but I'm just letting you know. So several years ago, probably almost 10 years ago, companies like Siemens or GE Healthcare set up these automated processes on their MRI scanners, for example. This is an example of the Siemens whole body dot engine. And what it did is that you do a quick sweep of the whole body, and then using landmarks and traditional statistical techniques and image analysis processing, it was able to spot where the head was and then plan down from there and set it all up automatically. And, you can imagine that probably saved about, I would imagine, about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the protocol, for each patient. So you can see how that sort of thing is really useful. And, it had its own journey into clinical practice. Some radiographers still now don't like using it. They like to be able to, position it all themselves. They feel it's more, they either do a better job, or they feel more connected with the protocol. And then other people have adopted it, and it's like, great, yeah, hit the button, off you go, save a whole load of time. Other places where we used automated techniques, here's an example. This is segmenting or detecting a face, but you use these kind of techniques to look at tissue segmentation in parts of the body. This is an example of the brain, where you've got grey matter, white matter, and CSF. And it's based on looking at different spatial frequencies across the image, and pulling them out, and assigning it probabilities of belonging to a particular tissue class. And this kind of stuff has been around forever. Sorry. But let me tell you what's behind that. Eek! Yeah, loads of, if you like, complicated maths. It's not really complicated, but it can look complicated. And that all looks really scary. But you don't need to know all of that. You don't need to know all of that. You don't need to know all of that, sorry, to understand, to appreciate the outputs, right? You can limitations of the inputs, appreciate the outputs. There's Fourier transforms make up MR scanners, and optimize subset expectation maximization does, PET and SPECT recon, etc. But as I explained before, the difference here is that the algorithms in the computer program that we've written can learn these things. We don't need to sort of tell it where to look. It can discover the pieces of information within the data that will give us the decision or answers or information that we want. And we often hear it spoken about as being a black box. So I'm just going to give you a little reveal here. So this is what's behind a black box. This would be for image segmentation or lesion detection in an image. And as you can see, there's a series thing. You got your original image here, nothing to do with medicine, this one, but it's just for as an example. You're looking at different directions, different spatial frequencies, you pull out different features, and then it goes into something more detailed, and this all starts tuning until it can start splitting, usually into some sort of classification. So it might be within an image tissue segmentation, or it could be between different patient groups. And it's just a different way of doing what we used to do with statistical algorithms. And to be honest, if you don't understand general linear models or logistic regression model, or you have the same level of understanding of that as you do AI, you're not at a disadvantage. Most people don't know how traditional statistical methods work either, but you do understand the limitations of your input, rubbish in, rubbish out. That hasn't changed. So do we need to treat it any differently, therefore, when we're introducing it to deploy for better healthcare services? No. We already, as healthcare scientists, have a huge responsibility introducing new technology into the workplace. We have our own processes, standard operating procedures, evaluation procedures, etc., etc. And we would deal with this no differently. So, for example, the kind of things we always think about whenever we're introducing anything new into our service is system integration. Does it work with our systems? I have been to so many places, AI or not, where big hulks of hardware have sat in the corridor because they haven't realised until they got it here that it doesn't actually network into anything that we already do. Clinical integration, does it fit with our pathways, our workflow processes? Do we have to make substantial changes? Do we need to take time out to train properly? So in imaging, for instance, if we have a new scanner or a new clinical protocol, we will have a whole day of applications training, and we make provision for that, and anybody new comes along also has to go through that training. And we look at clinical effectiveness. So this might not necessarily be efficacy, but much more around does it change the clinical management of the patient going forward? So we can have better, more sensitive imaging techniques, but actually at the end of the day, does it really make much of a difference to what happens to that patient next? And finally, sustainability was what's the environment or the context and environment that the equipment needs to be in to sustain its use. So if it's championed by one consultant clinician who decides to go off and work in another hospital, no one else knows how to use it, sits in a cupboard, or it needs a stable electricity supply, or it needs a temperature controlled room, all of those kind of things. And we do that all the time, and it's the same thing if we're doing anything AI enabled. So I like to break up my evaluation of medtech/AI into 3 different areas. One is the technical side of things, usually the kind of stuff that happens, the bench work that we do, your equipment comes in. If you're an electronics engineer, you would, plug it in, make sure it's electrical safe, it's calibrated, it does what it says it needs to do. If we haven't seen something like this before, if it's a new scanner or a new protocol, then we start looking at clinical effectiveness, and if it's diagnostics, increased sensitivity, and also does it fit already with our ways of working? So, for instance, when the new hybrid scanners came in with SPECT CT or PET CT, how is the CT component purely there for attenuation correction, or do we start looking at protocols and adding in CT diagnostics at the same time as our nuclear medicine? And then the next thing is where we look at the cost side of things. I know, dirty word, money, but at the end of the day, our budget holders want to understand how we're going to pay for these things and how we continue to pay for them, because they're usually not a one-off capital investment these days. There's usually some sort of licensing around that. And we need to understand, therefore, how much it improves the entire service. So here's some examples. Putting in a new imaging scanner or a LINAC. So, and please insert your own version of this if you're not a medical physicist, which I know a lot of you aren't. So the medical physicist, so a new scanner turns up, you'll put in a phantom, it's a test object in the field of view, check the image or the dose delivered, says what it should do, says what it does, that definitely does what it says on the tin. We'll then look at any sort of image quality metrics like uniformity, size, shape, any distortion. If it's ionizing radiation, we want to make sure that field measurements, there's no stray radiation delivered, and it's all delivered on target in the right place at the right time, etc. For non-ionizing radiation, we might even do some protocol building on healthy volunteers, whereas with nuclear medicine CT protocols, we might do something where we either we're using test objects, or we might, if it's a new reconstruction algorithm, for instance, we might get raw data from previously and then run it through the two different algorithms. Sorry, I just need to blow my nose a second. I apologize. Mark, you'll have to edit that bit out. I'm sorry. And another example might be when you're doing a new processing tool or radiotherapy treatment planning system. You might do a standard image process with the old and the new method, and then you carry on post deployment surveillance. You check that results against the new and the old, and you check for any systematic differences and things like that. So I'm hoping that all of this is incredibly familiar to you, and this is exactly what you do at the moment, and you would not do anything different if it was an AI-enabled piece of tech. So we would do exactly the same thing. What I am going to tell you about next is maybe some frameworks or some slightly different ways of thinking about things. You'll recall that in the last few slides back, I said about fit with site, sustainability within the workplace, and also does it improve the system as a whole. So let me tell you about something called health technology assessment. And we can use, it's sort of referred to as evaluation framework. It's often referred to when you're looking at introducing new drugs and treatments into patient care, but you can also do it for equipment. It comes in other things, change improvement planner, change theory planner. These are all available on the internet. You can download them. The one that I like to use is something called Systems Engineering for Better Healthcare Toolkit, which was designed at Cambridge University, and it sits well with me with a physics and engineering background. It's something that my brain latches onto very easily, and it's quite a visual system. So let's go into that in a bit more detail. So here it is in a nutshell. Nice visuals. We've got 6 different sections to it, and you can download it here. This is the HTML, the URL, and I'll just quickly explain the different steps. So essentially, there are 6 steps. You've got defining the problem, developing a solution to fix this problem, and then understanding the context within which you are going to deploy the solution. You need to spend quite a bit of time on this part, okay? When you feel like you've got the handle of it and you've really defined your problem and what your solution is going to be, you need to start collecting the evidence to show that it has fixed the problem. Using the evidence, you then make the case for using your solution to fix the problem. And then finally, you're going to manage the plan of deployment. And there are some tasks associated with this. So we can look at defining the problem as, what's the current knowledge? We need to consult stakeholders. And when you're developing the solution to fix the problem, what's the value add? What's the clinical need that it's addressing? And then when you go into the sort of trial design, the data collection bit, it's all about trial design. How are you going to measure that it's got better? How good are you now? That's all the benchmarking. So you need to know, how are you measuring your system? And we might put some economic modelling in as well based on all of this. So this would be sort of your business case, or if you wanted to take it to the next level, a reason why you might deploy it across a whole region or nationally. So if we take this framework, you can then divide your project plan, your timeline, although a lot of these go on parallel, and in fact tend to spiral in on the solution. So you can hear, so you put your project team together, which will involve some of the stakeholders, your core stakeholders, maybe people you need to make things happen. And you start asking yourselves these questions. What does good Like, that's a really important one, actually. So someone might come along with a new whizzy technique, and then you're like, yeah, but what, not only what is that going to solve, but how is it going to look when we've improved? So these are all the different questions. Then you can break it down into the tasks associated with these questions. So you want to actually create the stakeholder map. And this is an interesting one because it's not just the people in your immediate surroundings, but everybody who might be touched by this. Not least your financial officer in your clinical group, but also the trust level, all your admin staff, your referrers, the patients as well, to some extent, maybe, but to all intents and purposes, they might not notice there's been any change. Or you can start, this bit's very important, defining your measures, as I mentioned. And this is another representation of it. So basically, you've got your 6 steps, and what you do is through the whole pipeline. So you start here and you're spiraling in closer and closer and closer to the better system in the middle. But you have to keep asking these questions all the way through the journey. Each of your, if you're an engineer and you're designing from scratch, quite clearly, okay, I'm going to build a robot that does this. But actually, if you're in, we've already got an AI technology, it's already commercially available, it's already CE marked. What is the problem they think? So often there's a mismatch between the problem that the company thinks they're solving and the one that you want it to solve in your department. So the reason we use an HTA, a health technology assessment approach to this, is because it's transparent and it's accountable, it's internationally recognised, and is a great way to share information amongst stakeholders who then have to make a decision based on this evidence that you've presented. So just to summarise, in the 6 steps, we've got, you're going to identify all the stakeholders and characterize their influence. So you've got people who are not very interested but really influential, people who are interested and influential, people who are influenced, who, what's the other word? They're not influential, but they do really care. And then you spend a lot of time in the current knowledge, so that's all based on your expertise, what you do, how workflow processes work, what's the current published literature, all of those kind of things. And then that helps you really define your value add for the clinical gap that it's addressing. Then you move into the evidence gathering stage if you need to. But we usually do. I mean, if you're doing quality improvement or service change management, you want to sort of review how well you're doing. And then, of course, you hopefully implement it to be sustainable. So these are the kind of people that I have in my team. So it's really important to link with the healthcare professionals and all the trial statisticians. Behavioural scientists are really useful, actually. They do all the qualitative research around quality improvement, service improvement. You need someone to look after all your databases. You should have a project lead, and sometimes you might put an economist in. But actually, this is my team, but actually within your own departments, you can cover all of these bases in terms of trial design and collecting qualitative information and et cetera, et cetera. So that's me. There you go. That's my details. You can contact me on that email if you've got any specific questions. Happy to come and do a sort of explanation in your department or help you get a project going or something like that. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now, and if anyone's got questions, happy to answer those.